Hey folks, you're on the Insecurity Project with Jamin. Today my guest is Amanda Campbell. Amanda is a kinesiologist and speaker. I've been following her work for some time and I'm super excited to have her on the show. Amanda, welcome.
Oh, hi, Jamin. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really rapt to be here today. And I just love your work. So I'm excited to have this chat.
Excellent. Well, that's great. So as is my tendency with all my guests, I'm always fascinated about backstory. So can you tell us a bit about where you started, and particularly what it was like growing up in your family in terms of your own beliefs about yourself? So the role your parents played in shaping your self-esteem and just what it was like being a kid in your world.
Yeah, well, I'm a twin sister.
Okay.
I'm 40 years old now, and my twin sister, her name is Nicole. I'm definitely more the extrovert. She's more the introvert. So she's the yin to my yang. Both of us, well, we've always been quite creative as kids. We were lucky to attend schools that not only offered academics, but sport and music as well. And we found ourselves in the music school most of the time, as much as we could get there. And that sort of started our passion for music and singing. Self-esteem always played a huge role as to, how much we pushed ourselves. I mean, when we were younger, we just did it for the fun of it. But when it all came to, gigging, or because we sang and wrote our own music all throughout our 20s and worked with producers. And I remember the one thing that always held me back was just that belief in myself with, anything that I've really done. But yeah, when we were younger, I guess I've always been a go-getter at heart. I'm a bit of a doer. I'm definitely the extrovert. And sometimes I try too hard, and sometimes I don't know how to just go with the flow. My mum's Croatian. She was born in Zagreb, and my grandmother was as well. And my grandmother moved in when Nicole and I were born. So we were raised by two mums. We were very lucky. And my dad's Australian, and he's definitely always been an entrepreneur at heart. So he was always working, rarely home, actually. So I guess we learned growing up to, my mum and my grandmother always put us first. Always. And I think that was really beautiful, and I think we were very loved. It took me a long time, I think, to learn how to put myself first growing up as an adult.
Yeah, sure.
And to not see that as selfish. And bringing the twin dynamic with that, it's a whole other podcast.
It's such an interesting thing. I think a massive generalization, but I would say that's more likely to be a woman's greatest challenge, is that whole thing about how do I put myself first without feeling selfish. It seems more likely for women to go last. There's not many men that go last in the context of their family, but the role of mother is often that nurturer, that support is, I'll put my life on hold for my family. So yeah, obviously that's an interesting thing to then work through as your own person. How do you find value and significance in yourself? So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think as we grow as adults and as we go through life experiences that teach us, whether it's in our interpersonal relationships or whether it's by illness or a setback or something we have to overcome, I definitely am understanding more and more that the more that you empower yourself, the more you can be what you want to be, whether it's that nurturer, lover, caregiver, and leading example to anyone in the family or colleagues. You've got to fill your cup up first.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this is not a question I prepared you with, but something that I'm fascinated in as a result of what you shared. I'm just learning so much around, the idea of fully becoming an adult, and that typically that the journey from child to adult is you're on a trajectory away from the nest. And there's a bunch of pressures internally and externally that work against that. So, you create dependency upon your parents and family, which keeps you stuck to the nest, and family have pressure and expectation on you to fulfill certain roles and expectations and be a certain person, and sometimes vicariously live out their dreams. So there's pressure back from them to hold you in the nest as well. So, but obviously what you're describing is the process of becoming your own person and filling your own cup. So how have you worked through that one, like the journey away from very nurturing mothers in particularly to break free while maintaining a sense of family?
I think there are various things that I've been through in my very early years to teens to now as an adult. And I remember there are points in my life where in my soul and in my intuition and gut, I knew when something didn't sit well with me. And I always really, I was able to identify, didn't always act out on it, but I was always able to identify that's not what I agree with, or I don't align with what mum thinks or the way dad behaves. And so I think we all go through this process of, family, tribe, belonging, and then we move on to a different stage of, the individual, and then what's right for me versus what's not right for me, and that power of polarity of when you know what you don't want, it kind of rebirths or births what you do want. And it takes courage and self-esteem and security to be able to stand your ground and find your own inner anchor to voice that truth. And I believe that's part of the process of what we're here to do, because it's only when we find our true inner anchor are we able to push ourselves out of our comfort zone to be bigger and greater and deal with the challenges that we have to face in life. So how did I do that? I think the more I studied in my more adult years, and the more I, even in my own personal time, started to study and learn, topics that were always of interest of me, such as energy medicine and intuition and spiritual practices, did I really start working this out for myself? Because, finding your own inner anchor and security is very much learning how to listen and find your inner voice and how to hear it and how to connect to it every day and how to trust it to help you navigate your way through life. And I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 24 years old. And by 29, I was paralyzed in a wheelchair. And it was in those darkest moments that I had no choice but to succeed. And I found my inner voice, because everything became quiet, living in rehab, not being able to move around four white walls.
Wow. So the crisis of health kind of pushed you inward to then have to solve those problems for yourself, because no one probably could solve them for you.
Yeah, and I think we all, anyone listening to this, we all have our own story, and it could be something as dramatic as a paralysis, or it could be any moment in life where in that moment you know that something has to change within you. And in my case, I had no choice but to succeed. Looking back now, it ended up being the best thing for me, but I wasn't changing and I wasn't listening to my inner guidance, so much so that, I believe that physical symptoms and that dis-ease in our body is sometimes the end result of us not listening, and that energy build up, and we don't deal and process with some difficult emotions, because we're never really taught how to do that, right? We're never really taught how to sit with difficulty or fear or anger and let it transform. We're not taught how to see our life from, the higher perspective on top of the mountain, where we see there's greater reasons for all the things that are happening in our lives. We usually come from that lower ground perspective where we're just reacting until we learn. And for me, I had no choice but to rise above, and search for the answers within, where most people are searching for all the answers externally.
Yeah, sure. I'm just curious about the no choice to succeed.
Yes.
Is that actually true?
Well, for me, I had no choice to succeed in that moment when just that was in my personal journey where when I was paralyzed, like my body literally stopped working. And for me, that was my wake up call. That's what I mean when I say no choice but to succeed. Like I waited until I got quite sick, and I'm really passionate about helping people to educate them, and so they can hear that inner voice and find their inner security before it gets that bad.
Yeah,
right?
I understand. Yeah, sure. I'm just exploring the fact that, in crises, there still is an opportunity to regress back to previous forms of certainty and not push through into the new emergence of what's happening, and to listen. So even a chaos, even crisis still doesn't guarantee inner transformation.
That's true. And why do you think that is? That's a really interesting thing to raise. Like that's one thing I'm constantly analyzing in my private practice is, sometimes people will step into wellness and sometimes people just don't, and they're not able to make that transition yet. So I think there's obviously a lot of moving parts at play when we're trying to transform something within ourselves. And I'm still fascinated, every day I love learning about what that's about. Why did it happen for me? Why did I recover when I wasn't supposed to?
Yeah, sure.
It's been 11 years that I haven't had any disease progression with my MS, and I'm so grateful for that. I really technically shouldn't be walking, but I am, and I've really recovered. So why does that happen? And a lot of my research has been on why is it that some people recover and then some people don't, and what goes on in our mindset, and what is it that we need to overcome. There's obviously a lot more to it. It's not just, hey, here's a formula and do this.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
The way that I think about that thing, why do some change, why do some not, is just the wonder of what it means to be human. So, I think what makes the hero's journey so compelling is and so riveting when we watch the tension and drama of someone doing something difficult, is that there's every chance that they will fail. In fact, it's highly likely that they will. So it's the odds are stacked against them, and it will take something superhuman to push through. So I think that's the fact that life is so high stakes and real is what makes it so beautiful. So the fact that you did find a way through and you are in a place of health makes it wonderful, makes it meaningful, makes it rich and beautiful, and gives you something to share, because it wasn't handed to you, because it wasn't guaranteed, because it was against the odds. That's what makes it valuable. So I think that's what life does. It gives us real choice, high stakes choice, difficult choice, so that it's meaningful for us. If it was just handed to us, I heard someone explain it like a footy example. I've forgotten what footy even is actually. But remember those old days when we used to watch football. But imagine you're playing a sport, imagine playing football and, you're coming out for the grand final and you've been looking forward to this game all year, and the opposition, they've switched the opposition team when it's the under 13 B side from the girls' school down the road. It's like, hang on a minute. If we win against the girls, like the under 13 girls, like that would be embarrassing to say that was even our opposition, because of course we were going to win, like, grown men professional footballers against these school kids. So that's of no meaning. In fact, it's almost embarrassing. What is meaningful is if you're up against last year's premiers. In fact, they've won every year for the last 10 years. You're the underdogs, and yet you find a way to triumph in adversity and you win that grand final. Like, that's the grand final that you go get a tattoo of, and
that's true.
because of how meaningful that victory was, because of how difficult it was. I think
how difficult it was, and that tension. And I really believe that tension is what we must go through in our adversities, and any adversity or setback that we go through. The person that we become through overcoming that is what allows us to step into wellness or to attract whatever it is that we're wanting in our life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So So then thinking about insecurity then as the foe or the opposition or the, the grand finalists from 10 years past, the undefeated champion. My friend Cody McAuliffe helped me see it like this just recently, that insecurity is almost a gift to say, it's an opportunity for you to resist something, to work through something, to do something difficult, to find your voice and listen. So, the whole intention of the Insecurity Project is helping people think about that work and to ready themselves to go, okay, I'm ready to take on these fears and these stories, these opinions that have formed inside myself that are, that are natural. They're gonna happen. It's inevitable that we develop insecurity, but it's also the opportunity to do the most meaningful work we'll ever have by overcoming this and work through it. So
yeah, I agree. I think that your work is so important, and I think you're giving people an opportunity to see and feel about insecurity in a different way. So for it to have a different perspective on it that's much more positive and welcoming, which allows people to then, overcome adversity with ease.
yeah, great, thanks. So tell us what you've learned about specifically insecurity in your own life, just the process of being okay with who you are and owning your value and worth, changing narratives. What have you learned?
I think self-worth directly impacts how we deal with and manage stress, and therefore how happy and healthy we are. As coming from the practitioner perspective, I help to educate my clients with understanding that we're either firing one or two pathways. We're either in growth and repair or survival and stress. And it very much comes down to how we perceive our environment and how we deal with our emotions. So how we think and feel is a mirror image of our biochemistry, but also how we'll interpret the world. Our self-worth definitely dictates how we will show up in the world, and therefore the decisions that we make. And also it impacts how I deal with change. And so my business is called Bend Like Bamboo for that exact reason. It's all about how do you bend in times of change with flexibility. And I've really learned that, growing up, it really impacted how much I pushed myself out of my comfort zone, how much I went for my dreams. And I always went for my dreams. I remember I've always pushed myself. I've always done everything I've wanted to do in different careers. But when it came to that last bit where I had to put myself out on the line and really put myself out there, that's when I often sabotaged myself, often. It also played a role in all my relationships, how secure I am within myself, how much I have the self-esteem to be able to not only listen to my inner voice, but to have a voice and to voice up when something wasn't appropriate or boundaries were stepped. This really directly has impacted my relationships in my life, which I've, keep learning as I keep getting older. It affected how I dealt with my diagnosis and how I felt about myself living with a chronic illness. It's affected whether I will remove myself from a toxic situation or not. And also my growth spiritually, impacts all facets of life. It's been, that's why I'm so, rapt that we're talking about it together, because as I said to you at the start, I just think this is such an important conversation to talk about. We all have insecurities, but they're there for a reason. It's not a bad word. It's like, oh, okay. So, the power of polarity, where when you know what you don't want, this really does birth what you do want. For example, anger has a purpose. It can be a very positive thing that can take you from a paralysis of fear into action. And, if we use our thoughts or emotions like that in a positive way, that propels us into the next stage of life that, we're wanting to go to next.
Absolutely. I love your energy around this and your excitement around it. I still want to hear more from you about how you've done it, though. I'm very practical, and the real theme of this podcast is all around making things as practical as possible for people. I think often the personal development space is pretty lightweight and fluffy and can be a bit abstract for people. So Yeah. Any things that you could share around the how of when you notice insecurity and when you
Mm.
notice that it's limiting you and notice that it's creating an experience that you don't want. What have you found effective in the process of dealing with that insecurity and overcoming it so that it's not hindering you in who you want to be and what you want to do?
I think, well, for me, I've how I set my morning up and my daily routines, morning, during the day, evening, are pivotal.
Yeah,
So
right.
my mindset,
Okay.
flexibility in my mindset impacts everything that matters. Our body's ability to repair, how happy and resilient we are, and how connected we feel. So I'll share with you my resilience formula, and that might help as well,
That'd
which
be
is
beautiful. Thank you.
basically a summary of like how I did it and how I applied that with walking again, but also the lessons I applied walking again, overcoming my paralysis later in life applied to performing at my best when, building businesses.
Great.
So the resilience formula is A minus, well, I'll spell it out, anchor minus letting go plus flexibility equals resilience. So
Okay.
anchor, if you imagine a tree or a bamboo tree or any tree, it is anchored so that it can be flexible and therefore it will bend in direct proportion to the wind without breaking. And so in life, and we have experiences that allow us to discover our inner anchor. Our inner anchor is who we are, what we stand for, and knowing what we are made of. So it really, you can't really teach that. It's something you experience in life by discovering your inner anchor, but bringing it into your awareness every morning into, like, we'll talk about morning rituals in a second, but for example, with journaling, you could have the intention in the morning to, today I'm going to set my brain up to notice how I can find my own inner anchor.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you bring that into your awareness, obviously, because of the way the brain works, you'll notice more examples in your environment during the day where you can make that happen or notice that. I think also when you have that inner anchor within you and you know who you are, what you're made of, and what you stand for, you're going to have better boundaries. You're going to be kinder to yourself. You're going to have the ability to be more compassionate to others. And I think in those moments when we have a fear day or an anxious day, we need to learn how to find that grounding anchor. So, and just let it be. Just go, today, I feel fear. I feel fear today. And if we sit with our emotions, I think we find that they will transform eventually. The energy will shift and move. And, but we don't like sitting in difficult emotions. And if we kind of suppress that or distract ourselves and we don't sit with it, it can become, there can be an accumulation of blocked chi in the body, which is where I usually, the clients will come to me and then I'm working on a physical symptom or a biochemistry issue or a thyroid issue or an MS issue or whatever. Physical injury could be anything that is an end result of this accumulation of energy. So that's the anchor. And then once you find your inner anchor, it's really important to get good at letting go. I have a really good book for that, by the way. I'm in the middle of reading it. It's called Letting Go, and it's by Dr. Hang on a sec. Dr. Martin. Oh, what's his name? I'll show you. Dr. David Hawkins.
Okay.
It's brilliant.
Great.
Brilliant. As you can see, I've got all these post-it notes. So I really highly recommend it. It's a really good book on the topic, but in my personal experience, the ability to let go of the past, of old redundant ideas and stories that no longer serve us anymore, because sometimes we need to get good at addressing that. We create stories to make sense of things in life. This is normal, but we don't sometimes check in and reflect on whether an old story is coming through into now, and whether it's actually reflective of our growth and who we've become. And sometimes we can attach to old negative stories, because if we're having that fear day, we will search for surety, and the brain will even divert to old pain habits, just because our brain knows, oh, at least I know that kind of pain. And if we don't check in and have a method a routine that works for us, that goes, oh, no, I need to let that go. That's old. That's not even relevant for now. Sometimes we can live our whole lives from an old story that's not even true for us anymore. So letting go is really important. And it's also the ability to let things come and go in our life without grasping. Because, you know, when we need things to be a certain way, you will only see what you want to see in situations, and that can be very dangerous. So letting go is also becoming more the observer, letting go of that judgment, attaching unnecessary dialogue to situations, because that's also another way that we can create a lot of insecurity is, you know, that the monkey mind, too much thought. And we when we're in our heads, we're not in our hearts. And when we can get out of our heads and we can close the tabs in our minds, and for me, I do journaling and meditation for that, and we can drop into our hearts and open it, that's where you can find that inner anchor and that security within ourselves. And so when you become a master of the anchor and you're really good at letting go, then we can bring in flexibility in our lives. And flexibility is the ability to change our minds or reimagine our future by letting go of these old stories. And, you know, growing up for me, because I attached to a lack of self-worth, I didn't value myself. I didn't know how to do this yet. I didn't, you know, all my decisions and how I imagined my future was not as big as it should have been. You know, we play small. And I think our body, you can feel it in your body when the soul stops expanding. It needs growth. Like, we need adventures. We need to push ourselves. And when we play safe, I think there's a part of us inside that dies, and you feel it. You feel it. And that's when if you have a daily ritual where you tap into your inner guidance, where you can listen, you know, so I do a meditation and I'll, you know, do breathing just to wash and empty my mind. Because, you know, we wash our body every day. How do we wash our minds? So yesterday I might have had a big day where I was in my head a lot. So, you know, I have a method to wash and empty my mind. And then only in the stillness can you tap into some inner guidance. And I take myself on top of a mountaintop after my, you know, I'm in my breathing meditation, and I'll talk to my higher self. Actually, it's a really good question to ask anytime. What would my higher self say right now, rather than your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I love rituals, and I think that they are, to me, they're more important than disciplines, because they have this element of going where the life is, to me, rather than things I have to do and I must do and I force myself to. But I think just the ability to reset and get out of our head. Insecurity survives when it's unexamined, and the busyness of life leaves a lot of stuff in our unconscious unexamined. So rituals that cause us to stop, to pause, to take stock, to clean, to wash, to let go, to find our anchor, to examine our stories sounds beautiful. So can you give us an example of what your day looks like in terms of the way you set it up with rituals?
Yeah. So when I wake up, you know, what I'm surrounded by and what I listen to or what I'm reading is very important, because that sets my brain up. Because, you know, the reticular activation system in the brain, that filter system, so whatever we're focused on, its job is to bring resources to us so we can make things happen for ourselves. You know, for example, if I had, let's pretend I wanted to buy a new car and I had that model on my mind, and simply by thinking about it, I'm going to notice more of that in my day. I'm like, there's this card, there's this card. So in the morning, that's why I will journal, and for, you know, not immediately, but it's like I'll wake up. I like to wake up naturally. I have a black pug called Henry. Usually he wakes me up because he wants his breakfast. And so I'll feed Henry, and then I'll hydrate with beautiful water and lemon. And I will
Beautiful
usually take
water.
myself.
Is beautiful water different from normal water? Or is there a trademark coming? Is this a business?
I try and make it a beautiful ritual. So
Great.
I'll put, you know, like I'll put lemon in it. Sometimes I love to have hot water with rosemary.
Okay,
You know, I
wow.
just kind of make it fun. And then, it's beautiful rosemary. And then I will hydrate myself. I usually take myself back to bed. I usually watch something very inspiring on YouTube, whoever I'm into at the moment, like, you know, Bruce Lipton, Joe Dispenza, whatever. Sometimes I remember before I had a big speech, I was performing on a big stage and I was so nervous, and I just put Jennifer Lopez on.
Yeah.
Like there was something about her that inspired me, that, you know, she's just playful, she's humble, but she's successful and she believes in herself. I don't know, there was something about her energy that I loved. So I was watching her in those mornings. So I'll hydrate, and then I'll get my journal out, and I've got a journal. What I did was I created morning and evening questions to answer, to do the work, so that you can bring an intention into your focus. You can really address how you're feeling physically and emotionally. It's like closing the tabs in your mind. And so you can learn how to stop suppressing how you really feel. And so I have a journal ebook on my website. But so I do that for myself, obviously. So I answer my morning questions. And then I will either get up and make my breakfast first, or I will go into a meditation first. Depends how I feel. So I'll sit in meditation and I will do a breathing technique. I've got lots of different ways that I do it, but I do a meditation to cleanse and wash my mind until I get to a point where I'm so calm. I ask my higher self, what do I need to know today? If I'm stuck on something or I'm going through something, I'll talk to my guidance about that. You know, what is it? What is it that I need to understand? And usually answers, they come. Like if you listen, it's your own voice, but there is guidance that comes through. And that is always cool. I really love doing that. And then I'll exercise. So I'll take the dogs for a walk. And, you know, usually most days I sort of couple that with yoga or Pilates. In the home at the moment, you know, on an app.
Yep.
So that's my morning.
Yeah, great.
That's my morning ritual. But what I do, another tip is I have a wristband. I've got a few wristbands on here, but this black one here, it says, bend like bamboo, I am enough. And this is what I give my clients as well. It's a tool because you've got morning and evening rituals. So for me, I journal and meditate. But across the day, I forget what my intention is. I forget what I'm working on. I forget to be in the present moment, and I get stuck in my mind about something. And so my wristband, it's a technique I call, it's a new book I'm writing, actually. It's called the pineapple effect. And because my twin sister and I have a word called pineapple, because we're so opposite, you can do this with any relationship that you have. You can have a word that just defrags you in the moment, but it reminds you, and this wristband is what does that. It reminds me to bring myself back into the moment, where sometimes I'm too focused on the past or over analyzing the future, which is not my most creative state. So it reminds me to bring myself back into the moment over the course of the day, to be present and just to think of what's going on now, you know, which is our most creative state. So that can really help with, you know, getting through adversity or performing at work.
Amazing. That's super useful. Thank you. You mentioned the Letting Go book. Are there any other books that you've found particularly useful over the years?
Yes. I love, on this topic, The Courage to Be Disliked by, I think I pronounce it Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. So these are, I think, Japanese titles. So The Courage to Be Disliked, highly recommend it. I mean, if you just look it up, it will come up. Mindset by Carol Dweck. She goes into wonderful topics on self-esteem and the role our mindset plays in everything that we've spoken about today. And another really great book I enjoyed recently by Marie Forleo is Everything is Figure-outable. Have you heard of that one?
No, I haven't. That sounds great.
Yeah, it's really, she just gives some really cool tools on how to believe in yourself and that everything is figure-outable. It's brilliant. It's such a great book. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, lovely. I'll make sure those books are in the show notes.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. Anything else that we've missed? Any other things that you think are really important to cover on this subject of insecurity and being unhindered?
Yeah. I think that we can become insecure when we're out of our comfort zone, when change comes, or also when, and this is how I work with my clients, is, you know, when we feel an inner conflict brewing, and, you know, we have goals, but what we really believe is what matters. And we want our goals to align with what we believe about ourselves and what we believe can be possible. But the inner conflict happens when there is not an alignment there, and you feel that in your body, and that can make you feel unanchored, insecure. So I think what you believe is what matters, is my message there. And discovering what that is can be very subconscious, which is why kinesiology is a great tool to figure out, well, what is it that I'm believing that's in conflict with my goals? So getting to the bottom of that is super important. There's so many different ways. If not a kinesiology session, then you will notice your reactions. So our reactions are a mirror image of what we're believing. So use your wristband if you do choose to use that as a technique. To catch yourself in your reactions as well, because your reactions can show you what you're actually believing, and you can question them in that moment, and you can decide if they're true. And that is a mirror image of the biochemistry you're firing in your body and how healthy you are, and that brewing is from that inner conflict which needs to shift.
Absolutely. Beautiful.
So
we were talking before we pressed record about the fact that you've got a podcast that you've launched recently. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, yes, thank you. In a couple of weeks, very excited, we'll launch Connect by Damien and Amanda. And I've got a podcast that I'm doing with my colleague, Damien Brown. So he's a nutritionist, naturopath, and kinesiologist. And he talks about the science and the biochemical, and I come from the emotional and spiritual perspective, but he does too. We just talk about really relevant topics that we're all going through right now from the practitioner's perspective, as well as both of us living with autoimmune diseases, so the patient perspective as well.
Amazing. Where can people find you online if they're interested in more of your work?
amandacampbell.com.au, just Campbell like the soup, Pbell.
Great. Well, look, thank you for a very enjoyable conversation. Thank you for the work you're doing in the world and for who you are and for sharing that with the audience today. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamin. And you too. Thank you for the work you do. I think it's wonderful. And thanks for having me today.
My pleasure.